Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you do not have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. As always, our website, it's on the internet, the World Wide Web, as they once called it, is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content.
Yep. Really great extended interviews. And of course, you get Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness, where we basically do this, but it's not live. And we do it with cable clips from, anytime. So give yourself that gift. And do, as Ramona Lawson writes, please do like with a thumbs up, Useful Idiots. Also subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to our channel.
And as always, we have to start the show by just acknowledging that we're not going to spend very much time today on the biggest story in the world, because the corporate media is not covering the biggest story in the world, which is Israel's continued bombardment and starvation siege of Gaza. Every day there's a new round of massacres, along with now we're nearly 2 months into a full-on siege by Israel, blocking all humanitarian aid, food, water, everything that people need to survive. People in Gaza are starving. What did Trump do last week? He said a few words about how, people in Gaza are suffering. We're working on that. That was it. Nobody followed up with that. He's just allowed to pretend as if he's doing something while letting Israel carry out this massive war crime.
I mean, it's so disgusting, and it's so disgusting that it's happening without, as you just pointed out, Aaron, and we've been pointing out for a few weeks now, any mention. I mean, how is this not newsworthy? It's not newsworthy because our media has incorporated into its thinking the idea that basically Palestinians are not full human beings. Because if they were, this is, of course, would be worthy of news coverage. So, and also something else they would have probably covered would have been that attack that people probably saw of a woman who wound up being Jewish walking in Crown Heights, who was attacked by a mob of angry, vicious, Orthodox Jewish men because she allegedly was wearing a keffiyeh. And so they had to attack her, spit on her, offer threats, rape threats. And there was one a police officer trying to protect her. It didn't really work. And that I also think would be newsworthy.
We had national congressional hearings over Zionist students claiming to feel unsafe on campus because some of their fellow students were protesting genocide. Meanwhile, at this protest in Crown Heights, not too far from me, people were literally, on top of harassing and attacking women, were also chanting "death to Arabs."
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Okay? Right.
Imagine people chanting that about Jewish people. Do you think that would make maybe some headlines? That would be on Fox News every single hour.
And MSNBC and CNN. Sure. Dana would be covering it. Dana Bash.
Sure. Dana Bash would be. Oh my God, this would be 24-hour coverage. But say that about Arabs, totally fine.
Yeah, absolutely disgusing. Yeah, and speaking of Orthodox Jews, I do want to recommend people look at Yaakov Shapiro, who's a great anti-Zionist Orthodox rabbi, and he condemned. He gave a speech against Ben-Gvir, which was really great. And he goes, "Minister of Security, the only thing you're securing is a place for yourself in the depths of hell." Good line.
All right. Well, to kick it off, let's as always turn to Meet the Depressed.
Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. As President Trump nears the 100-day mark of his presidency, the world is watching the president's escalating trade war, his mass deportation plans, and his diplomatic moves. In his efforts to broker a ceasefire with Russia and Ukraine, President Trump has been unable to secure a deal he promised he could accomplish on day one. White House envoy Steve Witkoff met with President Putin for 3 hours on Friday. The meeting came after President Trump called on Russia to stop missile strikes on Ukraine and made a rare personal rebuke of Putin, saying, "Vladimir, stop." But there is growing pressure.
One of my favorite lines of Trump's first 100 days so far is "Vladimir, stop."
Yeah.
Very direct. It's personal. It's the kind of messaging we want from a politician, right to the point, it's concise, and it's personal. It's not vague. He's got his target audience, and that's Vladimir. Vladimir, stop.
Yeah. Keeps it personal, informal, right? calling him by his first name.
Mhm.
I like that. You know, shows that it's not. He's kind of calling him in as opposed to calling him out.
Pressure on Ukraine to accept a deal allowing land taken by Russia to remain in Russian control.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
As world
I'm sorry to laugh, but that's a funny line.
Yeah.
Not taking over the whole country is a big concession. In Trump's mind, that is, because in his mind, countries have the right to conquer other countries by force. I mean, look at his fulsome support for Israel. So when they hold back and don't take over an entire country, that's a very big concession. You know,
Right.
I imagine.
Peace next.
I wonder if he spoke that way to his like tenants. You know, like not jacking up your rent by like 5 times. That's a very big concession on my part.
Right.
Very big.
I'm not kicking you out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Letting you have some water. That's a very big concession on my part. But the thing is, the premise of Trump's comment is false. And this is why I can laugh at it, is because Russia hasn't tried to take over all of Ukraine. If they wanted that, they would have to send a lot more troops than they have.
Right.
The aim has been to compel Ukraine into negotiations that it refused to engage in prior to the war in terms of implementing the Minsk Accords and then also since then, after the failed Istanbul Agreement, where there was a deal reached, but then the U.S. effectively sabotaged it, then to take more territories, 4 provinces that Russia now claims as its own, but not the whole country. They've never tried to do that.
Right. But again, I mean, Trump is probably amazed that they're not opening up hotels and like a Riviera, you know, the Dnipro Riviera or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure the moment there's talk of that, he will try to get in on the action.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
leaders gathered at the Vatican on Saturday for the funeral of Pope Francis. President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky met for the first time since that Oval Office blowup, captured in this stunning photo. And after President Trump said this week he was prepared to recognize Crimea as Russian territory.
Why is this photo so stunning? I mean, it's interesting. These 2 world leaders heavily involved in this disastrous proxy conflict, just having a meeting like out in the open, but it's obvious what's going on. This is a photo op. Okay. If this were a serious meeting that we're getting somewhere, they wouldn't be like pulling up 2 chairs in the middle of the Vatican, just, you know, for a little side convo.
Right.
There'd be maybe at least a table where they can write some things down. So this was a photo op, obviously. That's what it was, a stunning photo op. And
Yeah,
it's kind
exactly.
of
She fell for it. Yeah.
For it.
Yeah, exactly. It is. I will say aesthetically, it's a pretty cool photo, but I don't think he means that in that way.
President Trump posted after the meeting there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. Zelensky provided few details about the meeting.
Mr. President, how did the meeting with Trump go?
First of all, I just have to say, is this like a new stage in the war that he's recognizing with a new wardrobe? Because he's not wearing his signature olive green. He's wearing all black. He has the look of kind of like a security contractor. You know what I mean? Like a little bit of a black Eric Prince vibe. Maybe that's what he'll pursue next. Yeah.
My color palette isn't that refined. That looks like it could be olive to me, but
what he's wearing?
Yeah.
Oh, I think this is a historic moment, Aaron, where I think we just diagnosed you with colorblindness.
Well, so be it.
Yeah.
So be it. Well,
Let us know in the comments. To me, it's definitely black, but if it's me, then let me know. All right. You're a Zelensky wardrobe apologist, Aaron.
That's really productive meeting. I don't want to go to a lot of details if it's possible, because the questions, very sensitive questions on, of course, totally it's about how to bring peace closer and how was resultative, positive Paris and London. And we want to continue such meetings to bring peace to Ukraine.
And joining me now is Secretary of State.
I really question whether anything substantive was discussed between Trump and Zelensky. I mean, what are they going to do? Look, Russia's winning. Russia just claimed to have expelled or finally defeated Ukrainian forces in the region of Kursk, which is the Russian area that Ukraine attacked last summer. And when Ukraine did that, this was seen as this bold move that was putting Putin on his heels. Russia claims, I haven't verified this, so they could be lying, but they claim that they've now taken care of that. So what is there to accomplish on the battlefield? And what is Trump going to do? Is Trump going to now reverse course and all of a sudden start going to Congress asking for more money for Ukraine?
Right.
I strongly doubt it. So I just don't really, I can't imagine that there's much really different going on. Trump's threatening now new sanctions on Russia. But again, what's that going to do? They've already imposed a lot of sanctions already. They want to do secondary sanctions on countries that buy energy from Russia, maybe. All right,
Yeah.
well, that will just spike oil prices for everybody. I don't see Trump doing that either. So even if Trump wanted to reverse course and suddenly get behind Ukraine, I just don't see what he could do.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that the West blocked those peace talks or those negotiation talks. What, it was a month after? Was it a month after the invasion?
Yeah, 2 months after, like less than 2 months.
A month after,
Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to get to that because some of the people who took part in blocking those peace talks, Jake Sullivan and Victoria Nuland, they popped up to make an appearance this week on the Cinema News shows, and what they have to say is pretty interesting. But let's first hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
Ooh.
And Marco Rubio is going to be asked the question, Katie, I know it's on everyone's mind. Why haven't we imposed more sanctions on Russia yet? Because if you're a journalist working in the U.S., interviewing someone about the Ukraine proxy war, what other questions can there be other than, are we sanctioning Russia yet? Just like as we talked about, kids like to ask, are we there yet?
Right.
Will President Trump follow through with imposing new sanctions against Russia?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to, the president, we have multiple options, frankly, to address this and to deal with all of this, but we don't want to get to that point. This is still not the time. I think what the president is saying and has been saying for some time now is he is aware that he has these options. People ask.
Sorry, really quickly. This looks to me like a laser facial, or he's wind chapped, but there's something going on with Marco. Could be a tanning bed. But as you see, the skin around his eyes is a lot whiter than the rest of his face, which is also something you see on Donald Trump. So it could be that he's following his lead on that also. Just all things to keep in mind. Okay.
Him about it all the time, but what he really wants is a peace deal. He wants the dying and the killing to stop. This is a terrible war. It's cost the lives of thousands of people, billions of dollars, and generational destruction on the side, especially on the Ukrainian side. We want the war to end. You saw yesterday at the Pope's Mass, there was talk about war and how it needed to stop. The Pope, the late Pope, who's celebrated for being a peacemaker and trying to talk about these things. We should all be happy.
And that's why you, Marco Rubio, we're not really a fan of the Pope, I'm imagining, because the Pope was known as a peacemaker, and that's not what you're known as, even though he's pretending to be a peacemaker now because Trump apparently wants peace in Ukraine. But Marco Rubio spent his career promoting war.
Right.
And this is kind of an awkward position for him to be like singing the praises of peace.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, note that does not apply to Palestine, of course, where peace apparently isn't an issue and war isn't a bad thing.
Happy that we have a president of the United States and Donald J. Trump who wants to end and prevent wars. And that's what we're trying to do here. And so ultimately, look, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't come to fruition, then as a nation state, there are options that we have for those who we hold responsible for not wanting the peace. But we'd prefer not to get to that stage yet because we think it closes the door to diplomacy.
Well, you know, the president has made a number of demands against Ukraine. Just last month, the president told me he might impose penalties against Russia. I guess given the frustrations that he is voicing, Mr. Secretary, why hasn't he imposed sanctions yet?
So that's two questions.
Yeah.
Why haven't we imposed sanctions on Russia? I mean, if you want to sort of pretend that you care about like peace, at least kind of keep the sanctions question to one question. But it's this is all they can ask. Like, why aren't we doing more to punish Russia? The idea of diplomacy engaging with people we've been conditioned to be like that we've conditioned to think are our adversaries. It's just they can't process the thought of engaging in diplomacy. Everything has to be sanctions, war, sanctions, war.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're really used to getting our way, and no country should be disagreeing with us. And also, we love throwing around sanctions, and these people have literally no interest in diplomacy, no understanding of how the world works. And because they live in echo chambers and go to the same dinner parties, and every other colleague of theirs on all other channels asks the same questions, they don't realize how absurd it is to be pushing sanctions through the form of questions.
Here's one more from Kristen Welker, again, trying to basically throw shade at the talk of diplomacy with Russia. And she introduces a new line I haven't heard yet as applied to Ukraine. I've heard this about Israel. When Israel tries to basically ignore international law and justify taking over more Palestinian land, they come out with, well, they don't acknowledge our right to exist, which is a useless term in international law. No one acknowledges each other's right to exist. They acknowledge each other's rights and their sovereign borders. And Israel, by the way, doesn't acknowledge its own borders. But here's Kristen Welker trotting that out when it comes to Russia and Ukraine.
They also love using that talking point in Israel, the right to exist.
Yeah, that's
President
what
Putin has never acknowledged Ukraine's right to exist. So why do you trust that he won't invade Ukraine again or another European country?
So, like, it's a nonsensical question. Like, no one acknowledges each other's right to exist. Like, in the case of Palestine, you're asking a Palestinian to acknowledge Israel's right to steal your land. Like, does someone want to do that? And with Russia, like, Russia's acknowledged Ukraine's rights. What Russia has said is they're tied, though, to respecting the rights of ethnic Russians inside Ukraine, which Ukraine has not done since the 2014 coup. That's what Russia has said. We respect Ukrainian sovereignty, but they have to respect the rights of ethnic Russians inside of Ukraine. So now Kristen Welker is coming up with this new thing that, like, Russia doesn't respect Ukraine's right to exist, and therefore they're going to go invade somebody else. This is all just like new creative ways to criticize diplomacy, which people don't like to do.
And also, it's worth pointing out that Putin, in an essay, said, because people are always claiming that there's no right to exist is not recognized, but he did say in an essay, I'm confident that true sovereignty of Ukraine is possible only in partnership with Russia. Together we have always been and will be many times stronger and more successful, for we are the one people. Today these words may be perceived by some with hostility. They can be interpreted in many possible ways, and I will say one thing: Russia has never been and will never be anti-Ukraine, and what Ukraine will be is up to its citizens to decide.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way,
and
when he says that we're one people, people say, oh, see, there he is. He's denying that Ukraine is his own sovereign country. Well, Zelensky's also said a similar thing. He said that we're one blood.
Right.
What they mean is simply that there's a huge historical, cultural, familial link between Ukraine and Russia.
Exactly.
Okay. Mike Waltz.
Oh, gosh.
The National Security Advisor. We talked earlier about that photo op between Trump and Zelensky. Well, Mike Waltz was very moved by that image.
Iconic. That setting, that scene, that meeting is going to go down in the history books. For President Trump to be a president of peace, to be talking peace and diplomacy in the Vatican, of all places, just before we were able to walk out and the president sat with world leaders, people of all faiths, hundreds of thousands in the crowd. And the thing he was determined to do was to talk to Zelensky face to face and talk about how we're going to get the largest land war in Europe to an end. Both sides have to want that. He's expressed his frustration with both sides, but yet his determination. And if you go back to, we're 100 days in, Maria, just 100 days ago, Biden and his team had no end in sight. This was an endless war. This was a meat grinder of men and material and national treasure that really he had never defined victory. And President Trump is determined to use diplomacy to bring this war to an end, to talk to both sides. And just in 100 days, we've had multiple rounds led by Secretary of State Rubio, by Ambassador Steve Witkoff in Saudi Arabia, and now in the Vatican. And it was just truly special to stand there with other world leaders looking on as the President Trump led the way.
really a beautiful photo op, and they're very proud of it. Whoever came up with that photo op is going to get a promotion in the White House this week because they're really singing its praises. But yeah, listen, it is true that the Biden administration did absolutely nothing to end this war, and they did everything to fuel it. And now that there's talk of peace in Ukraine, those same Biden administration officials are crawling out from under their post-administration hole and trying to defend themselves. And one of them is former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
I just want to add one thing before we play that, which is that I do think it's worth pointing out that I do not think that the Pope, who he invokes, Waltz in that clip, I don't think he would agree that Trump is a peace president, especially given how strongly he condemned the genocide in Gaza. All right.
When you were National Security Advisor, the Biden administration went nowhere with this, with trying sanctions, you didn't engage with Russia. So now you're saying it's okay to engage with Russia. When you look back, would you have done something differently?
Well, first of all, we did engage with Russia. We had multiple channels to talk to the Russians, and we talked to them throughout.
But certainly not in the way they are now.
No, because one of the things we recognized while we were in office was that Putin was at that time not prepared to come to the table to do a deal that would generate a just peace for Ukraine. So we recognized
This is such a funny clip, okay? He says, okay, first of all, Martha, actually, yeah, we did engage with the Russians, okay? And then she goes, like, no, you didn't, and not in this way. He's like, yeah, well, yeah, because they don't want peace. So how can we engage with them? So he wants it both ways. Like, of course we engage with the Russians. But then when she points out they didn't, yeah, well, of course we didn't engage with the Russians because they don't want it. They don't want peace. Like, what do you want from me? And yes, anyway, let's continue this clip, and then we'll show just what Jake Sullivan is saying, why what he's saying is so stupid.
Had to actually build more leverage for Ukraine. And in the closing months in office, we surged military equipment, we tightened sanctions, we seized the proceeds of Russian assets, and we got Europe to come along with us in all of that. So we handed off to the new team quite a bit of leverage for Ukraine to get a good deal at the table. I hope they do not end up squandering that leverage.
The leverage was telling them that they couldn't negotiate with Russia. That was the leverage that they gave them. Exactly. They really empowered them to lose much more territory than they would have if they had been able to negotiate with Russia, if Boris Johnson had not parachuted into Istanbul. Is that where he visited him, or did he go to Ukraine to talk to him?
Yeah, Boris Johnson went to Kyiv while the Istanbul talks were still going on. But it's just such a funny statement. What actually happened was Trump won by campaigning to end the war in Ukraine. Right. And once that happened, the Biden people were like, all right, our proxy war project is in big trouble. Let's surge as much weaponry as we can. Let's give Ukraine permission to hit inside Russia with ATACMS, which we hadn't done before because we were afraid of World War III. But since we're leaving anyway, then I guess the threat is receding. And that's what happened. They just tried everything they could to prolong their proxy war as long as possible, knowing that Trump was coming in on a campaign to end it. And now Jake Sullivan is saying, actually, we gave them all this leverage to do more. Well, if you had all this leverage, why didn't you use it when you were in office?
Right.
It's just so nonsensical. And then he claims, of course we engage with the Russians. Well, this is what the Washington Post reported back in July 2022 about that. In the nearly 5 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has maintained the same posture toward Moscow. Do not engage. So sorry, Jake. Your official policy was do not engage. And that's why you also went ahead and sabotaged the peace deal that Ukraine and Russia had brokered early on in the war.
So disgusting. Which is why every time like they lament or decry the loss of territory, the loss of lives, like don't be modest. You helped cause that. Give yourself credit.
All right. Well, another area where the Biden administration could have taken credit if they were serious about diplomacy would have been restoring the Iran nuclear deal, which they had brokered under Obama and which then Trump tore up in his first term. But Biden and Jake Sullivan came back into office, and rather than say, hey, Donald Trump made a big mistake, we're going back into the Iran deal, they just adopted the Trump policy. And now that Trump is back in office for a second time, he's now talking to Iran once again, and he's talking about a new deal that probably will look very much like the one that Trump killed and that Biden and Jake Sullivan refused to re-enter. So here's Jake Sullivan on that.
Iran, because they say they have made progress and some sort of deal with Iran, saying they can't get a nuclear weapon, but we've made progress. He, of course, ripped that up when he first came into office after the 2016 election. Do you see hope there that they can settle something?
Look, when we left office and handed the Iran file off, Iran was at its weakest point since the 1980s, maybe since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. They'd lost their main proxy, Hezbollah. They'd lost their air defenses. We had defended Israel twice directly against Iranian missile attacks and shown that Iran couldn't really do serious damage to Israel. So the conditions were ripe for diplomacy and for a deal. And I think there is a possibility that they could get a deal. I think that deal in its elements won't look too different from the deal that President Obama and Secretary Kerry produced in the Obama administration that Donald Trump ripped up. And I will find it very interesting to see a lot of the critics of that deal come out in support of what Trump produces. But I myself believe there should be a diplomatic solution here, and I believe there's one achievable.
Okay, fair point.
Yeah.
If Trump doesn't
right
make a deal
about
with
that,
Iran, if Trump doesn't make a deal with Iran, it will look a lot like the deal that Obama negotiated. But then the question becomes, why didn't you return to that deal when you were in office for the previous 4 years? Like, especially since, as you claim you had in Russia, you had all this leverage and Iran was in such a weak position. Like, why didn't you do that? Why is everything now up to Trump?
Right.
It's very, very bizarre. That whole episode is very strange. The lead negotiator for the U.S. under Biden with Iran was Robert Malley, who was part of the first Obama administration. He was a part of efforts to end the Syria war. He also was a part of the original Iran nuclear talks. And he was basically sidelined in a weird case that I still don't really understand, where he was accused of mishandling classified information. And, somebody suspecting some cynical motives here might think that he was basically undermined, sabotaged by hawkish elements of the Biden administration who didn't want to make a peace deal with Iran under Biden's watch. And so Jake Sullivan has an accurate point that Trump, if he wants to make a deal, will have to basically accept a lot of the same provisions that he killed when he killed the Iran deal. But again, why didn't the Biden administration take that on? And why did they leave this up to Trump?
Right, exactly. I mean, as you said, Jake Sullivan is right that there will be hypocrisy if Trump does build that in. But Jake Sullivan's engaging in hypocrisy right now by praising the deal that he himself didn't implement, which he could have implemented under Biden. So he's doing the same thing, just in a different direction. Because no one really cares about peace. No one really cares about any important issues. They just want to bleed their adversaries and score partisan points.
Well, speaking of bleeding adversaries, Jake Sullivan has something in the Trump team that he can get behind. He was asked by Martha Raddatz, like, is there anything do you think the Trump administration has done right in foreign policy? And this is Jake Sullivan's answer.
I want to give people a chance to but also let's see if anyone can guess what he's going to say. Just put it in the chat if you have any ideas what you think Jake Sullivan likes that the Trump administration has done. Let's see if anyone guesses it. Let's give people a couple minutes. A couple more seconds. Also, please do give a like while you're doing that. Let's see. Anyone get it? Deporting people. That's a good guess. Orange juice, Israel. That's a good guess. More money to Israel. Nothing. Israel's genocide. Okay. Well, you're in the right geographical area, kind of, somewhat. All right. Let's take it away.
What they've been able to achieve. I think there are certain steps with respect to the Houthis that I could really get behind. We took military action against the Houthis. They have stepped that up. I still believe that we need to connect that to a larger strategic endgame with the Houthis. But that would be an area where I think there's been some continuity.
How about if you care about a larger strategic endgame, you do what the Houthis are demanding, Ansar Allah is demanding very explicitly, which is you stop the genocide.
Yeah. And what is the U.S. doing in Yemen against the Houthis, as he says,
right.
or really called Ansar Allah? They're bombing civilian areas. They continue to carry out atrocities. And again, another conflict zone that the U.S. media largely ignores. But they've bombed, infrastructure. They've killed civilians in markets. And what is the strategy there? It's all to safeguard Israel's genocide in Gaza, because Ansar Allah, the Houthis, they've been messing with ships in a bid to pressure Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. That's why the U.S. now is bombing Yemen to basically safeguard Israel's mass murder campaign in Gaza. One of the latest U.S. airstrikes apparently hit a detention center in Yemen holding African migrants. So that's what Jake Sullivan's excited about. Indiscriminate bombs in Yemen that are killing civilians. In the latest case, migrants being held in a detention center.
Yeah, and just yesterday, 8 were reportedly killed in that very facility you just mentioned. 8 of them were killed, and it's just incredible that this is something that people celebrate. And as you just mentioned, Aaron, they say the Houthis because just like Israel says Hamas, right? When they kill civilians, they say they're killing Hamas. It's the same principle.
All right. So we've heard from Jake Sullivan. It's great to hear from him again. He's been missed by the Useful Idiots community. Another fan favorite has also reemerged with the threat of peace in Ukraine on the horizon. And she has something to say about that. Her name is Victoria Nuland. She is a former senior State Department official, has been all over, just like Jake Sullivan has, this Ukraine proxy war from the start since it began in 2014. And she spoke to CNN's Fareed Zakaria.
Done in a very long time.
What do you think Ukraine could live with in terms of a security guarantee? Because Trump has made clear he's not going to provide a security guarantee. He will not support Ukrainian membership in NATO. Is there a kind of European guarantee that will work? Because the Europeans are doing, or at least have committed to do, a lot more on defense, right?
They have indeed. First of all, Ukraine has to know that whatever it agrees to in terms of territory, it can protect and defend the rest of the territory that it controls and prevent a third wave of Putin attack when he gets tired of whatever he's agreed to. So it has to have a very, very strong military going forward. It has to have air defenses, and it has to have international support. The Europeans have talked about a peacekeeping force. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to have Western forces or international forces offshore who could, strike Russia if it broke the deal. But
what could go wrong with that? Having Western forces just off of Ukraine ready to strike Russia, which has nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Like, let's say there was a conflict on the U.S. borders. Would Victoria Nuland support a Russian-aligned coalition of forces off of our borders ready to come in and clean up in case there's anything goes wrong? I mean, this is nuts. She just casually throws out this idea that literally would mean nuclear annihilation. But that's because she's obsessed with what she says, striking Russia. She really, really wants to strike Russia because ultimately she wants to see a regime change in Moscow, which is, they really thought they could get it this time with the Ukraine war, but it hasn't happened, at least not yet.
Can you imagine that these people like to consider themselves diplomats?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, this has been her portfolio for a long time, but she really embodies just the uniparty because she's worked for everybody across the spectrum. She's worked for Dick Cheney. She's worked for Hillary Clinton. She worked for Barack Obama. She worked for Joe Biden. She worked for George W. Bush as well.
Right.
And she just represents this. It really is the essence of the diplomatic corps, is people who promote policies that could lead to nuclear annihilation.
Yeah. People who like to provoke nuclear war. That's her suggestion.
Without those kinds of guarantees, why would Putin just not come back for more when he gets bored of this deal? Because he's made very clear that he doesn't consider Ukraine a country, and his aspiration is to control all of it.
No, that's just not true. He's never said he wants to control all of it. That's not true. And again, if that was aspiration, why didn't he try to do that? I do think he miscalculated. I do think he thought that Ukraine's government would collapse when he invaded, which they didn't. But the idea that he wanted to take over the whole country, there's just no evidence for that whatsoever. You couldn't take over the whole country of Ukraine with the size of the force that Russia sent in. So Victoria Nuland basically is continuing to advocate policies that they had 4 years to try, that putting aside morality and peaceful alternatives just didn't even work. And And also, she talks about security guarantees. Well, Ukraine asked the U.S. for security guarantees as part of that peace deal that they reached with Russia back in Istanbul 3 years ago. 3 years ago this month. And the U.S. initially said, listen, we'll give you security guarantees, but not as a part of any deal with Russia. So basically, if you wanted security guarantees from us, you have to walk away from these peace talks. That's how Victoria Nuland and the Biden administration helped sabotage Istanbul. So Ukraine listened, walked away, then came back and said, hey, how about the security guarantees? And the Biden administration said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that, but we'll give you weapons. That was revealed by a Ukrainian negotiator named Alexander Chali, who talked about this in a paper that nobody paid attention to. But that's what happened. So if she cares
Why
about
would that
security
matter,
guarantees-
Aaron? Why would
Yeah.
anyone pay attention to that?
If she cares about security guarantees, she would have offered them to Ukraine when Ukraine asked for them to reach a peace deal with Russia. But Nuland didn't want a peace deal with Russia because that would interfere with the real goal of using Ukraine to bleed Russia.
Right. And of course, Biden was happy to pretend that NATO membership was on the table.
Yeah.
It actually wasn't. So, all the talk of Ukrainian agency and self-determination, that's a nice idea, an idea that the Biden administration has undermined and consistently undermined.
100%.
So gross. So gross to pretend that they care about Ukrainians. I guess it's nice to, maybe we should be relieved or thankful that they don't pretend to care about Palestinians. At least they're honest about it. Whereas with Ukrainians, they pretend to. I don't know. Pick your poison.
Let's hear a little bit more from Victoria Nuland.
You know the Ukrainians well. My sense is that if they don't feel like they're getting the kind of things you're describing, they will keep fighting. I mean, they're fighting for their country, for their independence. And my sense is that the idea that we have so much leverage over them that they will just fold if we tell them to fold isn't quite right.
It's absolutely not right. Russia could stop fighting tomorrow and this war would end. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And
that's a talking point, by the way, that Israel always uses. If Israel puts down its arms, right, then Israel will end. If Hamas does, if Israel, and if Hamas does, the war will end.
Yeah, I mean, what she's basically saying there is that if we agree not to put Ukraine in NATO, and if Ukraine recognizes the autonomous rights of ethnic Russians inside Ukraine, which was the basis for the Minsk Accords, which she pretended to support when she was in office while actively undermining them, then Ukraine is over as a country. It's like this, fatalistic, theatrical posturing just to justify a war that actually is bringing Ukraine to an end, that is killing hundreds of thousands of people, which Victoria Nuland still wants to continue.
Right. You'd think that maybe she'd be called out on the failures of this policy, but no, apparently not. And by the way, speaking of calling out, guys, we're not even at half the likes. I gave you a chance to interact, to play a game with us where you could guess what Jake Sullivan would like. Shout out to Ian Samuel, by the way, for getting it right with the Houthis, with Yemen. But come on, let's raise the likes. Let's see. I really think we should be at least at 1,000, obviously. Guys, make it happen. All right, we got there. But I'd really rather not take precious time out of the show to cajole you into doing this.
All right. Don't make us act like Jake Sullivan. We have to start thinking about the leverage we have over you, the audience, to get you to the proper like threshold. Because just like Jake Sullivan, just like we do have leverage. We have a lot of leverage. We could stall. We could sing annoying songs. We have a lot of those in our repertoire. We have a whole catalog of. I mean,
we do,
you might like that actually, but we're here to deliver the news, and we want to keep to that mission.
Yeah, don't make us sanction you.
Yeah, well, impose sanctions on the audience. That's right. That's right.
Secondary, yeah.
Too, yeah. We've been working on those sanctions packages for a long time now. We're ready to
to launch.
Yeah. That's right. No true flags. We can blow up your pipeline. We can cut off your internet, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It is just a series of tubes.
Exactly.
That's the late Ted. Yeah. What was his last name? Said that crazy Alaska senator Ted Stevens, I believe, who used to wear an Incredible Hulk tie on days that he was going to make a speech. Anyway, all right, let's see. Moving forward, we're going to skip, right? And we're going to play Chucky, a Schumer clip.
Let's first hear from Sergei Lavrov.
Okay. I thought we were close.
A rare interview with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, on corporate American TV.
Ukraine accepted on March 11th that idea of a U.S. brokered ceasefire without preconditions. You're saying the preconditions are a negotiation to end something else?
No, it is not a precondition. It is the lessons learned after at least 3 times the deals similar to the one which we are discussing now.
Yeah. But Russia has not accepted that call for a
Ukrainian
ceasefire.
regime with a strong support from European capitals and Biden administration. If you want a ceasefire just to continue supply arms to Ukraine, so what is your purpose? You know what Kaja Kallas and what's his name, Mark Rutte said about the
NATO
ceasefire.
Secretary General and the European Union.
They bluntly stated that they can support only the deal which at the end of the day will make Ukraine stronger, would make Ukraine a victor. So if this is the purpose of the ceasefire, I don't think this is what President Trump wants. This is what Europeans, together with Zelensky, want to make out of President Trump's initiative.
So what he's saying here is basically, if you want a ceasefire, but you're just going to use the ceasefire to like keep sending weapons to Ukraine to fight us, then why would we agree to a ceasefire? Like, what's the point? And he's invoking the history of top NATO officials, including Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande, admitting that when they brokered the Minsk Accords, that actually this was just a ruse to give Ukraine time to rearm, to fight Russia. And I don't think, at least maybe I'm being too naive, but I don't think Merkel actually meant that. I think she was just saying that to appease pro-war forces, but they've said that. So given that they've said that when we've reached these previous peace accords, like the Minsk Accords, the whole point was just to buy Ukraine time. Lavrov is saying, like, we're done with that now. If you want peace, then like stop supplying Ukraine with weapons and then we can have peace. That's what he's saying.
She, by the way, this clip doesn't show it, but she was like her tone in other sections of this interview, Margaret Brennan, was adversarial in a way I've literally never seen her do. It'd be great if she did that to people besides him. Yeah. And
that's great. Hold them accountable. But why not also apply that to your own leaders as well? Just a thought. Not just the Russian guy, but how about your own people too?
Right. Or Israel. I mean, she's good. She's better than most on Israel, which is damning her with faint praise. But yeah, she's not nearly as adversarial with people in that area of politics.
Okay. Let's hear from another Useful Idiots fan favorite. The guy who's been sounding the alarm about anti-Semitism in this country. He just wrote a whole book about it. And by anti-Semitism, he means college students who don't like mass murder. That's what he means by anti-Semitism. His name is Senator Chuck Schumer.
President met one-on-one with President Zelensky. Both sides called that meeting productive. Afterwards, President Trump criticized Vladimir Putin's attacks on Ukraine and said, quote, maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. As the Democratic leader in the Senate, you're a member of the so-called Gang of Eight. You see intelligence about how the war is going. Are you supportive of these negotiations?
Well, look, my great fear, Dana, is that Trump will just cave into Putin. That's been the overall indications all along. And of course, the bottom line is very simple.
By the way, I like the expression, you know, it's caved, you cave to something, right? He's going to cave to Putin, but Schumer says he's going to cave into Putin, which makes it seem like he's worried that he's actually going to like physically become Putin in some interesting process.
Maybe Chuck Schumer has in mind. Maybe Chuck has in mind like that Dave Matthews Band song "Crash Into Me." You know,
oh, great song, creepy song. It's very creepy at the end, but an amazing song. But yeah, I like that. We're gonna have to do a duet. We're gonna have to write a duet song, I guess, from the perspective of Putin would be saying "crash into me." Well, luckily it's a back and forth crashing, right? So it could go either way. But yeah, that's good.
Cave into me, yeah.
Yeah, crave into me. Love it. Okay.
Of course, the bottom line is very simple. That if we cave to Putin, if Trump caves into Putin, it's bad in 3 very bad ways. Number one, to just abandon Ukraine after all the sacrifice that they made, after so much loss of life, and with the rallying of the whole West against Putin, it would just be a moral tragedy to undercut Zelensky, which I believe Trump is headed in that direction.
you undercut Zelensky when you sabotage the peace deal that he reached 3 years ago, which could have avoided all those deaths that you claim to lament. This is like the contradiction, of course, which will never be called on, but they're the ones that abandoned Zelensky. Zelensky was elected. People like to forget. He was elected on a peace platform. Like, that's why he won, or in large part why he won. Also because he was an outsider. But he was talking about ending the war that was then going on at a much lower scale, but that began in 2014. And people like Chuck Schumer helped sabotage all that by fueling a proxy war with Russia rather than trying to end it. So it's Chuck Schumer that's already abandoned Zelensky a long time ago.
Second, it tears asunder our alliances with Europe. The Europeans have stood up for us. The whole West has stood up for us. They put in money. They've used all kinds of diplomatic and economic tools to back us. And how is Europe going to trust us ever again if Trump backs out? But third, and maybe worst of all, it's a sign that the United States is weak. It sends a signal to every dictator in China, in North Korea, in Iran, that if you stand up and bully Trump, you're going to get your way. So I am very worried about where he is headed. I think that he is in a position where he feels he can sell out Zelensky. He's sort of saying yes one day, no the next day. But overall, the trend is very, very bad.
Yes, nothing displays strength as opposed to weakness, other than sacrificing young Ukrainians on the battlefield just for your goal of bleeding Russia and continuing to do that after more than 3 years. I mean, it's so depressing for Democrats that they've dug themselves this hole because they have so many legitimate now areas of attack against Trump for all the damage that Trump is doing. But on this one, they've been so indoctrinated by, I think, like Russiagate propaganda, basically, that they just cannot see that, even putting aside morality and how foolish this Ukraine proxy war policy has been, just electorally, this doesn't even help them out because most people want an end to this war anyway. But Chuck Schumer wants to just keep doubling down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they think that ending a war would be a bad thing, basically.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Okay. More Chuck Schumer.
Well, this is a really important segment. I mean, unlike everything else, like, this is one you guys are really going to want to pay attention. Close your other windows and programs. Put on Do Not Disturb, because we're going to hear from Chucky about his great book on anti-Semitism in America, A Warning. And obviously, Dana Bash is someone who takes anti-Semitism really seriously. She takes it so seriously that she compares student protesters who oppose genocide. She compares that to 1930s Europe, because they're very similar to Nazis, the students who are non-violently protesting, many of whom are Jewish, and calling for an end to the genocide. Okay, let's take a look.
Turn to a book that you have recently written and is out. It is entitled Anti-Semitism in America, A Warning. You talk about anti-Semitism on the right, but you also address anti-Semitism within your own party. Here's part of what you wrote, quote, "I worry also about the larger American left, which may look the other way and be too complacent or forgiving about those who exhibit anti-Semitism in their ranks."
I love it, like Chuck Schumer, who's like a career servant of Wall Street, pro-war, is now positioning himself as like the conscience of the left. Like, right. I'm calling out my own people. This is my community. I'm the brave whistleblower. When he's like been attacking these same forces his whole career. Now he wants to, like, is he Bernie Sanders now? Like, yeah.
I mean, he even said, I've seen many interviews on this, and in the book he says this, I believe too. I'm pretty sure, because I did read it to review it with Norman Finkelstein, that the reason he wrote this, one of the reasons he wrote this, was to speak directly to the left, as if, the left is waiting with bated breath to hear where Chucky is going to tell us to go and what to do.
It's the book of the month in DSA wings across the country. People are just, dying to read this book and hear from one of their own on what they're missing about when they go out there and protest starving and blowing up children in Gaza. Chuck Schumer's here to tell you what you're missing.
All right, well, we got more from him.
You say that's one of the biggest reasons you wrote this book.
Well, I wrote the book to warn about anti-Semitism overall in America, on the left and on the right. We owe it. Conor Cruise O'Brien, the great Irish poet, said anti-Semitism is a light sleeper. And when there are times of trouble, as there are now, anti-Semitism raises its head. On the right, it's despicable and awful. I've experienced it myself. On the January 6th takeover, I was within 30 feet of these hooligans, and one of them said, "There's the big Jew, let's get them." But we've also seen it on the left, not in the Democratic Party, but on the left. And we have seen things that we never used to see before. For instance.
By the way, that was a nice Freudian slip. He said on the left, but look at the direction he points in.
But on the left, and we have seen things that we never used to see before.
Right.
For instance, someone getting on a subway and saying, "All the effing Zionists get off the subway." Jewish delis having.
Okay, that's all the effing Zionists. Does he notice that? They didn't say that all the effing Jews get off the subway. That's not the great example. Now he gives other examples, and we're going to let him give those next. And a lot of them are dishonest. But I just want to say one thing about the way he claims that it's a problem on both sides. The chapter "Anti-Semitism" on the right in his book is 24 pages long and includes 21 citations in total. And the "Anti-Semitism" on the left chapter has 35 pages, so it's longer, obviously, and includes 14 citations. And 11 of those 14 citations were written before October 7th, even though his thesis is that anti-Semitism has significantly risen on the left since October 7th. All right, let's go back to Chucky. Oh, you're muted, Aaron.
Sorry.
I know you want to give him you really wanted to take it in. You were muting yourself so you could hear Chucky.
Yeah. Just a reminder, there have been actual hate crimes.
Yes.
Committed against Arabs in the U.S., including that young Chicago boy who was stabbed to death.
Mm-hmm.
That's actual hate. That's actual anti-Semitism. Chuck Schumer's best examples for quote unquote anti-Semitism are apparently, and again, I can't even take his examples at face value, but someone going on a subway and saying all the Zionists get off. Like, I mean, that's not anti-Semitism,
right?
Even if that happened that way. And the fact that this still is, it's so humiliating, it's so embarrassing, and it's hard to take. But this is who this is who is dominating our political culture still. So we have to listen to them. So let's sit through as much of this as we can.
Have nothing to do with Israel, having stones thrown through their windows. The head of the Brooklyn Museum, who's Jewish, but the Brooklyn Museum has nothing to do with Israel, a few blocks away from here where we're sitting, had red paint all over her. And
Okay, this is a great example. I love this example because it is true that there were some I don't know, attacks, vandalism on the owner, the person who runs the Brooklyn Museum, but they had been protesting in front of the museum for months before this incident. They were trying to get the museum to call out the genocide and divest from sponsors who donated to Elbit Systems, Friends of the IDF, etc. But the museum called cops on these peaceful protesters. And what's extremely important is that the activists then did escalate after having their demands ignored, and they targeted the homes of 4 museum leaders. And of those 4 museum leaders, 1 was Jewish. So that doesn't sound like you're targeting Jews. That doesn't sound very anti-Semitic. If it was anti-Semitic, they would have targeted only the home of the Jewish person and not the home of 3 other non-Jewish people. And this was such a misrepresentation of what happened that the New York Times was forced to issue a retraction because they initially said that the protesters were targeting Jewish officials, when again, the majority of them were not Jewish. And this book was written after that retraction came out. So he's not only misrepresenting, but he's very consciously lying. All right, let's go back to Chucky.
I believe we have to alert America to anti-Semitism and teach them. That's why I wrote the book. The best antidote is for people to know the truth. Here's a terrifying fact, that 20% of people under 30 don't believe the Holocaust was a myth, and another 50% have never heard of it. We need an education.
By the way, that's not really accurate because those were polls that were people chose to respond to them. They weren't sent to people kind of like blindly and randomly, that was a poll that you could decide to respond to, which means obviously the people who are Holocaust deniers or think it's a myth are the ones who are going to go out of their way to respond to it. So very dishonest.
And my goal is to have this book read in the high schools and colleges across America, because I think it would just shatter the myths that are out there, which have always been below the surface and are popping up on both the left and the right much too much.
I want to read something else you wrote in your book. You wrote, at Harvard, my alma mater, more than 30 student organizations signed a statement calling the Israeli regime entirely responsible for the attack. And the months since October 7th have brought too many examples, far too many, of overt anti-Semitism. American Jews being harassed, attacked, and villainized simply for being Jewish. President Trump, as you well know, says he's cracking down on Harvard and other universities because of their response, or lack thereof, to those anti-Semitic incidents that you're describing. How do you think he's doing with that?
Right. Well,
this
first,
whole thing.
Sorry, yeah.
This whole thing, it's like, hey, here I'm interviewing one of the most powerful Democrats in Congress on my prominent CNN cable news show. We're the victims here. Let's talk more about how we're the victims and we're under threat. And these evil college students who don't like genocide are all a bunch of anti-Semites. You know, the only possible explanation I can come up here is that Chuck Schumer and Dana Bash, that they're secret anti-Semites and that their mission in life is to spread anti-Semitism simply by opening their mouths. Because if you were to hear these people speak at a time when there's mass murder going on and you have people in positions of power like them, yet they're the ones claiming that they're the targets of anti-Semitism. Like, how are you? Many people are not going to be able to resist the urge to have a bias against these people because they're so unhinged and they're so self-victimizing, and it's so off base with reality. So, on some subconscious level, perhaps these two actually want to spread anti-Semitism.
Well, Zionism and Zionists require anti-Semitism to justify their existence. So it would make sense because these guys are really proud Zionists. And by the way, it's really funny. Well, I'll save it to the end. Let's go back to the clip.
Harvard did not do enough to curb anti-Semitism. I've been vocal about that. But let me just say this. What Trump is doing goes way beyond anti-Semitism. He is going after these universities like he's going after judges, like he's going after law firms, like he's going after the media, because he just doesn't. He doesn't believe in democracy. He thinks he's king, as he said, and he did this at Harvard. So a bunch of us Jewish senators just sent a letter to the administration saying, detail the specific incidents of anti-Semitism and why cutting money off to cancer research or to Alzheimer's research has anything to do with anti-Semitism. It doesn't. He is using anti-Semitism, and it's appropriate to go after specific incidents of anti-Semitism as a pretext to hurt these great universities. It's going to hurt every American. It's going to hurt the kids at the universities who've had nothing to do with protesting, but it's also going to hurt the kind of medical research and other kinds of great research that is done at Harvard and other universities. So we sent him a very strong letter just the other day, asking 8 very strong questions about why this isn't just a pretext.
All right. Strong letter, strong questions. I think we can all predict what's going to happen, which is that Trump is going to stop engaging in this overreach and disappearing people, kidnapping people, and slashing funding. That's my prediction.
I mean, I love these people. They're like, anti-Semitism is everywhere. The college kids are a threat to everyone. This is horrible. And then Trump actually takes their scam narrative and then uses that to crack down on the schools. And then they're saying, oh, he's gone too far.
Right.
You helped give him the ammunition that he needs now to go after these schools. So Chuck Schumer, while claiming to now have concerns in a strongly worded letter, he gave Trump a huge help by writing a scam book like the one he's promoting now and going on CNN every single week with the help of people like Dana Bash to spread this scam. Just as the scam was used against Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was, looking like he was going to be the prime minister of the UK. They used fake allegations of anti-Semitism to undermine him. And that's what they do. Anytime there's a threat to their agenda, which includes supporting Israeli occupation, they trot this out. And they have all the time in the world to do it and all the power in the world to do it because of their prominence. So great to hear from Chuck Schumer. Are we done with him? Hopefully.
Yeah, we're done with him. And
Okay.
One other interesting thing is that if people watched Thursday Throwdown, yeah, it was Thursday Throwdown last week where we did it, right? That, Dana Bash basically tried and failed to get a similar analysis from Jonathan Greenblatt, right? Because they're trying to thread the needle where they are being totally hyperbolic and inventing claims of anti-Semitism out of thin air. They're all about that, but they also are embarrassed by Trump because, as you've often pointed out, Aaron, he's an embarrassing steward of foreign policy, right? Or of American policy. So they're embarrassed because this is so over the top, the disappearing people, kidnapping people. But Jonathan Greenblatt, she even asked Jonathan Greenblatt what he was doing kind of to make sure that Trump didn't weaponize claims of anti-Semitism to erode democracy. It's like, well, nothing. So I'm sure she's happy that Chuck Schumer could provide the cover that she was looking for. Okay. What do we got next?
We're running a little short on time. I wonder if we should skip ahead to other topics. We've covered a lot of Ukraine so far and a little bit of Gaza, but there's also the Trump administration's continued deportations. And there's a new one over the weekend where the latest to be deported, including U.S. citizen children who were deported alongside their undocumented mothers. And Marco Rubio was asked about that.
U.S. citizen children have been deported with their mothers. Now, this is according to the Washington Post. The family's lawyer says one of them is a 4-year-old with stage 4 cancer, deported without medication or ability to contact doctors. The family's lawyers are also saying their clients were denied communication with family and legal representatives before being deported. And it's raising concerns about the issue of due process, that it's being violated. So let me ask you, is everyone on U.S. soil, citizens and non-citizens, entitled to due process?
Yes, of course. But
But if you're a child with stage 4 cancer, you're not entitled to your cancer medication. Sorry.
Right.
That's
right.
Like, you got to go. Yeah, you got to go because America
Drain on
first
the
somehow.
resources. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
tell you, it looks an immigration standing. The laws are very specific. If you're in this country unlawfully, you have no right to be here, and you must be removed. That's what the law says.
Well, no, you must actually have a hearing. You can't automatically get removed, except under very specific circumstances, which do not include being a 4-year-old with cancer.
Somehow, over the last 20 years, we've completely lost this notion that somehow or completely adopted this idea that, yes, we have immigration laws, but once you come into our country illegally, it triggers all kinds of rights that can keep you here indefinitely. That's why we were being flooded at the border. And we've ended that, and that's why you see a historically low number of people not just trying to cross our border, trying to cross the border into Panama, all the way down in the Darien Gap. I mean, it's been a huge help for those countries as well. On the headline, that's a misleading headline. Okay, 3 U.S. citizens, ages 4, 7, and 2, were not deported. Their mothers, who are legally in this country, were deported. The children went with their mothers. If those children are U.S. citizens, they can come back into the United States if there's their father or someone here who wants to assume.
Yeah, the 4-year-old can like toddle back across the border, I'm sure. What the cancer-ridden 4-year-old will do that without her mom. Yeah.
Them. But ultimately,
and no big deal to subject a child with stage 4 cancer to a deportation proceeding where they're just, forced to leave the country immediately. And we're going to hear actually from the attorney, from an attorney who's representing one of the families involved here, who has a much different take than Marco Rubio.
Right.
Who was deported was their mothers who were here illegally. The children just went with their mothers. But it wasn't like, you guys make it sound like ICE agents kicked down the door and grabbed the 2-year-old and through him on an airplane. That's misleading. Yeah. That's just not true.
Just to be clear.
Well, let's hear from one of these lawyers.
But before we do that, Aaron, I have to point something out. I'd be remiss not to point this out about Rubio. It's interesting to hear him waxing patriotic and poetic about immigration law. It's pretty important to note that he lied about his family experience. He said that his family fled Cuba under Castro. It turns out that they fled Cuba before Castro's rise to power. Castro was not in power at that point. And his grandfather came here illegally. So luckily, he's so lucky that his own draconian policies didn't apply to his own family.
Okay, so Gracie Willis, who is with the National Immigration Project, she's an attorney and she represents one of the families in this case. And she was on Democracy Now! This morning, and this is her response to Marco Rubio.
To both him and Tom Homan?
Absolutely. First of all, whether or not these were technically deportations is beside the point. The point is that these children were taken without any choice by their caregivers or them out of the country by ICE, which is an immigration agency. In terms of the parents' choice, Secretary Rubio's comments are incredibly misleading and disingenuous. At no point did these parents have any choice. They were not offered a choice. What do you want for your children? They weren't offered the kind of opportunity to speak with each other and make what would have been a very difficult decision, but one that two parents are entitled to make together about what's in the best interest of their family and what's in the best interest of their children. These mothers were told, your children will be deported with you. In our case, the government filed what was purported to be a handwritten note by our client's mother that said, I will bring my child with me. That's not a statement of wish. It's not a statement of desire, of choice. It's a statement that she was told, and she was told to write.
So there you go. Marco Rubio says they had all the choice. This attorney is saying actually they weren't even allowed to consult with the other parent. They were rushed out and kicked out. So that's how it's going. And the fact that one of the targets here happens to be a child with cancer. I mean, as they were doing this, maybe they didn't know about the cancer diagnosis before, but as this was happening, did anybody think, hey, maybe we shouldn't separate a family where there's a child going through cancer right now?
Right. Really bad optics. But they're such ghouls, honestly, Aaron, that they may not have even registered why that may be a bad look.
Okay, well, we have limited time, so do you want to hear from Carrie Lake, former Arizona Senate candidate, or can we skip that, or you want to go to Bernie?
I think, yeah, let's go to Bernie. This is a good one.
All right, well, so Bernie Sanders has been touring the country, speaking alongside AOC to huge crowds on the Fighting Oligarchy tour. But some people are not down with fighting the oligarchy, and that happens to be the corporate media pundits who work for the oligarchy. And Bernie Sanders was questioned about his choice of words on Meet the Depressed.
Ask you about something that your colleague, Senator Alyssa Slotkin, said. She said Democrats
note who she's citing here, okay? Alyssa Slotkin.
Should stop using the term oligarchy because it's a phrase that doesn't resonate with all Americans. Are you missing a chance to speak to a wider audience, Senator?
Well, geez, we had 36,000 people out in Los Angeles, 34,000 people in Colorado. We had 30,000 people in Folsom, California, which is kind of a rural area. I think the American people are not quite as dumb as Ms. Slotkin thinks they are. I think they understand very well. When the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%, when big money interests are able to control both political parties, they are living in an oligarchy. And these are precisely the issues that have got to be talked about. Are you living in a democracy when Mr. Musk can spend $270 million to elect Trump and then becomes the most important person in government? Or are AIPAC and other super PACs have enormous power over Democratic candidates?
Okay, AIPAC reference. I like that, Bernie. That's pretty rare. You don't hear that too often. So good for Bernie for calling them out. You know, yes, it's only a few seconds, but that's better than most, which is we can never mention that AIPAC essentially buys off candidates and buys and, you know, spends millions of dollars to defeat people like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush who dare call for a ceasefire in Gaza. So good for Bernie for mentioning that.
Yeah, and you know, people may remember Slotkin gave the response to the State of the Union. This is who Slotkin is, and so when she talks about how the term oligarchy doesn't resonate with some Americans, I think she's talking about herself. I don't think she wants to be reminded of oligarchy because she herself is extremely centrist, extremely moderate. She comes from a very wealthy family that invented a special brand of hot dog, but she also served as a she was in the CIA, and she would brief Bush and Obama. So she was a nice bipartisan woman. And she also is a self-described Zionist. She condemned, guess who? Of course, you guessed it correctly, Rashida Tlaib, for her, offensive statements. She also condemned South Africa's calling what was happening in Israel genocide. She said that was grossly unfounded. She also was one of 5 Democratic House members who voted against an amendment to prohibit support to and participation in the Saudi-led coalition's military response against the Houthis in Yemen. She was the main sponsor of the 2020 Iran War Powers Resolution, which sought to restrict President Donald Trump's ability to commit the U.S. to a war with Iran without a congressional declaration of war. So that was good. That was good. But she also voted against a student loan, very important student loan decision. She joined, I think, 7% of the Democratic caucus in voting against this debt relief. 93% of the Democratic caucus supported it. She did not. So maybe that's why the term oligarchy doesn't speak to her.
Well, you're making a strong case, Katie, that Alyssa Slotkin is an out-of-touch neoliberal warmonger. But on the other hand, her family did help invent a special kind of hot dog. So I'd like to hear more about that special hot dog before I weigh in. And maybe Bernie Sanders should also look into that hot dog too. So because he might find a way to be more in touch with the American people if he knew what kind of hot dog business the Slotkins have blessed us with. So I'll reserve judgment on Alyssa Slotkin until I hear more about this hot dog. Yeah,
that's fair.
Okay, more from Bernie. You want to hear the rest of this answer?
Let's see. Sure, yeah. Well, or
you've got to talk about. That is the reality of American society today. The very rich getting richer, working class people are struggling, 800,000 people sleeping out on the streets. If we don't address that issue, the American people will continue to turn their backs on democracy because they're looking around them and they're saying, does anybody understand what I am going through? And unfortunately, right now, to a large degree, neither party does.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news.
So perfect to have Slotkin give the response to Trump. You could not make it up. Yeah. Well, we have one more person that we want to hear from, right? When it comes to discussions of oligarchy, friend of show, Jen Psaki.
Jen Psaki, yeah, former Biden administration White House press secretary, now MSNBC host, and she weighed in on this oligarchy controversy because it's so controversial to be calling out the people who control our country and are ripping people off. So we have to debate it and, of course, criticize Bernie Sanders for bringing it up. So here's Jen Psaki.
Issue that Senator
prevent his administration from doing things that they find harmful.
You know, Jen, that was sort of part of the argument I think that Senator Slotkin was making. Is the oligarchy message a little bit, does it resonate with a large enough audience? Senator Sanders said, yes, it does. Come to our rallies. Look at how many people are there.
Well, yeah, look, I think the issue that Senator Slotkin was raising was the word oligarchy and whether that is actually the word that should be projected on bumper stickers. I tend to agree with her that that maybe isn't the word. And here's why. Because, yes, there are people who are very tuned in, who watch you every week, who consume everything. And they, of course, it's not that people don't know what it is. It's just, is that speaking to people who are not consuming politics every single day and not consuming news, who are just raising their kids, trying to go to work, trying to make ends meet. And I think that's the point she's making. Actually, I think there's alignment in some ways. What I've seen in terms of a shift from the Democrats is really a move to emphasize the economy and economic messaging over the last 6 months. That was not front and center in 2024. I think we all know. They're doing it in different ways. It's sort of the experimentation phase right now, I would say. But that's been a shift. And I think it's
things are changing. The Democrats are changing. Yes, we're still poo-pooing Bernie Sanders when he brings up the issue of class and oligarchy.
Right.
But we've shifted. Oh, we've shifted a lot. Oh, yeah, things are changing. And note how there's no substantive critique of what Bernie is saying. Like, they don't like the word oligarchy.
Right.
But if they don't like the word oligarchy, come up with an alternative. But the problem is, it's not that they don't like the term oligarchy. They don't like the fact he's talking about class.
Yeah.
That's fundamentally what they're not comfortable with. Because if you don't like the word oligarchy, you could propose alternatives. Like, say, remember the 99% and the 1%? Why don't they propose that as an alternative? But they're not going to, because they don't want to talk about the oligarchy, whether it's as the oligarchy or the 1% or the ultra elite, because ultimately that's who
They're
they
part
serve.
of it. And they're either a part of it or that's who they're serving. Exactly. Yeah. And it's also, I mean, Bernie, like, regardless of what you think of this tour, and I know there are a lot of people who watch this show who think that Bernie is kind of dangerously and cowardly and uncourageously shepherding people back in the Democratic Party. That's a separate issue from what we're talking about here. The question here is that a good term? And I think Bernie's right to call out Slotkin for basically suggesting Americans are too dumb to understand what oligarchy means. And again, I mean, the high turnout at his rallies from people who are not just political junkies like Jen Psaki suggests that he is onto something and that the American people do understand. And it's funny to hear her talk about people who are just like trying to make it economically, trying to raise their family, not plugged in. She has no idea what these people want. And Bernie does. I mean, regardless of what you think of what he's doing about it.
Yeah. I mean, her whole shtick is basically to be like, the average person isn't concerned with things like the ultra elite control over our society. They have other concerns, which she doesn't even identify. It's just, and then of course and then she goes into pretending that the Democrats actually are changing and they're shifting, but they're not. I mean, Bernie Sanders, for all the criticisms of him, he's at least out there trying to talk about an actual issue and mobilizing people around it. And that's why he's drawing huge crowds. I don't think Elisa Slotkin, if she tours the country, will be drawing crowds that are anyway comparable to Bernie and AOC's.
Yeah, but she'd probably get a higher turnout of CIA officers than
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
100%.
Yeah, all her friends would come out. Yeah. All right.
All
I think
right.
that's it, right?
Let's definitely wrap it there.
Yeah.
Anything coming up on the Katie Halper show this week?
Yeah, I'm gonna have on Greg Grandin to talk about his great book, America. It's a great tome kind of on Latin America and U.S. foreign policy towards it. Also, this week I'm gonna be playing the rest of an Oliver Stone interview that I did, and probably almost certainly gonna have someone on to talk about the Crown Heights riots, 2.0, and the discussing attacks on pro-Palestine protesters, which are being defended, which is kind of insane. But there you go. That's the perfect face of today's Israel supporters is the face of someone who supports a violent mob of men attacking a lone woman. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's our show. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support us and keep us going while also getting some great bonus content. Thanks so much for watching Monday morning. Have a great rest of your day and week, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.